Hey guys, and Happy New Year! Welcome to 2017 and say goodbye to 2016. We're finally done with it. Say goodbye to all the horrible things that may have happened to you, including all the horrible movies you may have seen, which is what I'm gonna talk about today. This is going to be my list of my 5 least favorite films of 2016, and there were a lot to choose from. Last year I watched 153 films, about 90% of them in cinemas, and I think 2016 in general will be remembered as a year that fell flat for movies, especially if you're a fan of like big popcorn summer blockbuster things. Like, there weren't that many great ones in there. However, as usual, my list isn't gonna have like any of those movies, so if you're afraid that I was gonna mention like Suicide Squad or something, don't worry, that was nowhere near being the worst of the year. The movies on my list are smaller, definitely, and you probably might not have heard of them, which is good because you shouldn't watch these movies. But first I have to rattle off my usual disclaimers. Yes, I do a top 5, not a top 10. That's just the way I do things. And then the way I pick movies that are eligible for these lists is kind of complicated. Like, they're only eligible to me if they were released in the Philippines in 2016 and if they had their commercial releases in their countries of origin in 2016. If that doesn't make sense, then don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. And you won't see a lot of universally panned films here just because when I hear a movie's terrible, there's a higher chance that I'm not gonna watch it. So these are the ones that I just happened to see that were really, really bad. And of course, please don't forget that this is all my opinion. If you liked any of these movies that I'm going to mention, then great. Like, I'm genuinely happy that you could find something to enjoy in these films where I could find nothing to enjoy. And in all seriousness, if you have your own opinion about what the worst films of 2016 were, please do leave me a comment. I would love to hear it out. But anyway, before we get to the actual list, I have some dishonorable mentions as usual. So first of all, we have The Huntsman Winter's War, which is a movie that tried to be a prequel, a sequel, and a spin-off at the same time and failed at doing all 3 of those things. Next up, we have Ice Age Collision Course. In this movie, the world is ending and literally nothing happens. Like, this is such a colossally uneventful film and it's mind-blowing. Next up, and I know some of my friends are gonna be like, this should have been on the list, but it's not, Independence Day Resurgence. Hands down the worst big budget blockbuster of the year. One of the most soulless, unbelievably boring action films I have ever seen. And finally, it really pains me to put this here, but Ang Bagong Pamilya ni Ponching. This was the movie that, already in a subpar Cinemalaya was the lowest point of that festival. I just started feeling embarrassed for the people around me while we were watching it because it wasn't funny, didn't affect me emotionally in any way. But anyway, on to the actual list. So first of all, at number 5 is a movie that, again, really pains me to put it on here, but it's proof that I'm not just a fanboy. Like, I will call out bad movies when they are bad movies, so I am putting Ratchet and Clank here. And it sucks because, this is the worst animated film of the year, definitely. But I'm a huge fan of the video game series. And this is supposed to be this grand space adventure, but everything was just so bad. The animation just does not look good. There are no stakes or excitement in this big space adventure. And one of the most annoying things was they nerfed the tone of this film. The original video games had sort of a more mature tone. There was adult humor in those games, but here they just made it like kid stuff, and it comes off really, really weird. But I guess the thing that separates this from other video game movies this year is that they literally strung together a bunch of cutscenes from the video game and then animated scenes in between, and that's just such a disappointing way to make a movie. Next up, at number 4, we have not just a poorly made movie, but an offensive film to me, and that is Kote. If you don't know what this movie is about, it's about this guy who's a gay guy whose younger sister has Down syndrome. And then it's like the worst melodrama you've ever seen. Horrible overacting in this movie. It looks bad. The scenes in this film go on for an absolute eternity. The scenes here just did not want to end. And it's just such an alarmingly melodramatic movie that makes everything kind of come off like a joke. And I'm sorry, but I have to spoil this film because I can't convey how bad it was without me spoiling it. But it's a film that really doesn't do anything for LGBT representation or for people with Down syndrome, because by the end of this film, the younger sister, whose character has not been developed at all, she gets raped and then she dies. So, like, what do we gain from any of that? Like, nothing. It's just really, really depressing and not fun to watch at all. Next up, at number 3, we have another film that's offensive in a different way, and this is 50 Shades of Black. man, they had the easiest job in the world for this movie. Just make fun of 50 Shades of Grey. Like, that is the easiest job in the world, and somehow they ended up being much, much worse than 50 Shades of Grey. And I'm serious. You know, 50 Shades of Grey was funnier than this movie. As with most Marlon Wayans parody comedies, it looks cheap. The humor is really embarrassing, lots of jokes that should have stopped being funny after grade school. The acting never rises above the level of bad sketch comedy, and it really makes me nervous because it makes me scared that Marlon Wayans, a respected comic in other arenas, just doesn't seem to understand comedy. Like, you know, nothing about this movie is funny or subversive in any way. On to number 2, and you know, at least with movies like 50 Shades of Black, like, I could understand why I watched it. You know, it's a Marlon Wayans comedy parody of 50 Shades of Grey, so it must be fun. But this movie, I still don't know why I watched it. Like, a lot of my friends kept asking me, why did you watch Max Steel? And I still don't really know. This is the worst superhero movie I've seen in the cinema by far. This is much worse, in my opinion, than Fantastic Four from 2015. It's one of the worst movies ever made, in my opinion. It just gets everything about superhero films wrong. You know, the costumes are laughable, the editing is atrocious. Like, you know, they splice together sequences to mask the fact that nothing is happening in the movie. The lore within the film doesn't make any sense. The characters you do not care about, they're so lifeless. The actors just have no charisma, especially this lead guy. I have no idea how he got cast. Like, this movie is so bad that if you have superhero movie fatigue, if you don't like any of the Marvel movies out, if you watch Max Steel, you will end up enjoying every other superhero film. You know, there's a way to get this formula right, and Max Steel just does not get it right in any way. And finally, at number 1, my worst movie of 2016 was a movie that, again, was not just really poorly made, but it was also really offensive in ways that I didn't think were still possible in 2016 cinema, and that is Straight to the Heart. This is obviously, of course, also the worst local film of the year that I saw. Just extremely poor production values and just some of the worst stereotypical LGBT representation I've seen, like, ever, because this film is populated by characters who are gay and lesbian, and they're all played as stereotypes. It's a movie that tries to be like a comedy drama, but it's neither funny or dramatic, and I honestly couldn't tell when they were trying to be one thing or another. But the thing that really brought Straight to the Heart up to number 1 for me, this was like the first terrible film I saw in 2016, and it still stayed at the top. The reason why it's still at number 1 is because I just feel like it has such a questionable message. Because, again, spoilers for the film, you know, the premise of this movie is about this gay guy who works at a hairdresser place, and he slips and hits his head and falls into a coma. Then when he wakes up, he's suddenly straight. And I felt like that, that was an interesting, fun premise for a comedy. But then by the end of this movie, he's still straight, and he somehow has managed to convert his lesbian best friend so she becomes straight as well, and then they get married. And it's weird, so the message they're trying to send is that you can kind of convert people out of who they really are, and that you can play it for laughs. It's just a really tone-deaf sort of film made in a film landscape that is obviously a lot more mature than that. And in terms of comedy, it just does nothing for the subjects. There's no wit to the comedy. So yeah, I have just no idea how this movie got made, why it was made. If you can tell me what the movie meant and what you found redeeming about it, please let me know, because I really, really want to know. Alright, so those were my picks for the 5 worst films of 2016. If you guys have any opinions about these films that I mentioned, or if you think I left anything off the list, please let me know in the comments down below. Please tell me what your worst movies of 2016 were. And yeah, whether you have any disagreements or agreements with what I said, please leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.